You're standing in a room, arms loose, face composed, saying almost nothing about yourself. And it feels like winning. Someone asks a question that gets a little too close, and you don't flinch. You don't explain. You just hold the line. From the outside, it looks like strength. But look closer at your own jaw. It's locked. That fist at your side is clenched tight enough to leave a mark. That's not calm. That's a body working overtime to look like it isn't working at all. Here's what this is really about. The exact test that separates real stillness from a well-managed performance of stillness. A test that shows up once you see what silence actually costs when it's being used as a tactic. And by the end, we get to something quieter than any tactic at all. The point where that steadiness stops needing anyone watching to prove it's real. But first, the belief sitting underneath all of it has to be named out loud. Here's the belief most people carry without ever examining it. That staying quiet about yourself is a power move. Say less, reveal less, and you become harder to read, which supposedly makes you harder to hurt, harder to use, harder to predict. It sounds like strength. It sounds like control. But notice what's actually happening underneath that belief. You're still managing an audience. You're still calculating what to hide and when. That's not stillness. That's a performance of stillness. And performances take effort. If the goal was ever to feel unshakable, this can't be the way there, because you're still bracing. And bracing is the opposite of rest. Here's the deeper mechanism. The more you strain to control how you're perceived, timing your silences, managing disclosure like a strategy, the more you interfere with the calm you're chasing. William James noticed something similar about inner change. Force it too hard, and you jam the process. It's like chasing a word that keeps slipping further from your tongue. Some things only arrive when you stop steering. James suggested something close to this. When a change is ready to happen in you, the wisest move is often to step back and let it happen unaided. So, if silence about yourself feels effortful, you haven't found Wu Wei yet. You've just found a quieter kind of trying. But here's the honest counterargument, and it deserves airtime. Some schools of self-presentation teach the opposite of non-doing entirely. They teach cultivated unpredictability as a deliberate tool. The idea goes like this. People crave familiarity, and familiarity gives them leverage over you. So you scramble the pattern on purpose. You act with no visible consistency, and they exhaust themselves trying to decode you. That's not Wu Wei. That's a campaign. And it's worth naming clearly, because from the outside, calculated unpredictability and genuine non-disclosure can look almost identical. Same silence, same unreadable surface. So what actually tells them apart? That's the question the next chapter has to answer. Here's the tell. Strategy costs something. Alignment doesn't. Keeping people off balance on purpose requires constant upkeep. You have to track what they're noticing, manage the effect, protect the image, stay alert to whether the facade is holding. There's a real cost here, in time, in money, in attention, especially if what you actually want underneath it all is a simpler life. You must never let your guard down, because their reading of you is always shifting, always assessing, always live. That's labor. Real non-disclosure has none of that. There's no facade to maintain because there's nothing being performed. You're not managing their perception. You've simply stopped treating your inner life as material for their conclusions. No upkeep, no guard, nothing to protect because nothing was ever staged. And here's where the thesis goes deeper than strategy versus alignment. Some parts of you were never public property to begin with. They don't need protecting because they were never up for negotiation. Emerson wrote about a kind of quiet defiance, meeting the crowd of opinions and expectations with nothing more than a simple, undefended statement of what's true for you. Not an argument, just a fact you don't submit for approval. Seneca took this further, suggesting that self-possession might be the rarest thing a person can own, that the man who truly owns himself has lost nothing, even if almost no one manages it. This is the part of you that isn't withheld from a threat. It's simply never been on the table, and underneath even that, there's something closer to instinct than to reasoning. Seneca noticed that no animal, from the moment it enters life, is free from a kind of built-in wariness. Young fowls, he wrote, sense harm before they've ever experienced it. No trial, no memory, just a presentiment written into them before any lesson could teach it. That's not fear of one specific danger. It's an orientation toward what keeps a life intact. Some of your own discretion works the same way. You don't decide, moment to moment, to hold something back. You just do, the way a body flinches before the mind names the reason. That's not strategy. That's nature's own economy, working quietly ahead of thought. Which brings us to the quiet turn at the center of this. Real closeness has never required full disclosure. Emerson wrote that silence often says more than discourse because the length of an explanation only measures the distance of understanding between two people. Where understanding is complete, no words are needed. So the withholding isn't about fear of being read, it's the opposite. You've stopped needing to be fully translated for anyone to be near you. Here's a question worth sitting with. What's one thing you've decided never needs explaining? Not from fear, but because it was never anyone else's to interpret. You don't have to answer out loud, but if you'd like, leave it in the comments. Naming it for strangers can be its own kind of freedom. So go back to that line on the black page, the one that moved, curved, and then simply stopped being visible for a stretch. Nothing was hidden. Nothing was erased. It just stopped spending itself on being seen. That's the whole shape of this. You were never meant to prove the depth of your own inner life to anyone watching. The silence isn't a wall, because a wall still needs someone on the other side to keep out. This needs no one. It rests because resting was always allowed, and the measure of that kind of steadiness is that eventually it stops requiring witnesses at all. If you carry a version of this stillness, say so in the comments, not to prove it, just to mark it's real.